The Valari had watched Earth for 300 years. Their observation stations floated in the cold darkness beyond the moon, recording everything. They watched humans build their cities. They watched them fight their wars. They watched them send tiny rockets into space and celebrate as if they had achieved something important. Commander. Torvak sat in his observation chair and felt nothing but boredom. He had spent 40 years monitoring this primitive world, and every report said the same thing. The humans were decades away from real space travel. They were no threat to anyone. They would be easy to harvest when the time came. On the morning of June 14th, 2157, his screens went dark. Torvak leaned forward, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. Every satellite feed from Earth had stopped at the same moment. He ran diagnostics on his equipment, but everything was working perfectly. The problem was not with his sensors. The problem was that there was nothing to see. He switched to direct observation and looked down at the planet below. The cities were still there. The buildings stood tall and unchanged. Cars sat on highways. Ships floated in harbors. But there was no movement anywhere. No heat signatures of living beings. No radio signals. No electromagnetic activity of any kind. 8 billion humans had existed yesterday. Today, there were none. Torvak was reaching for the emergency communication panel when his second officer screamed. The sky above Earth was tearing open. It was not an explosion. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was as if reality itself was being pulled apart like fabric. And through the gaps, something was emerging. Ships, thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. They rose from beneath mountains that had hidden them for centuries. They emerged from ocean trenches so deep that no Valari scanner had ever reached them. They poured out of caverns and underground facilities that had never appeared on any survey. 50,000 vessels filled the space around. Earth in less than 10 minutes. Torvak had served in the Valari military for 60 years. He had seen the greatest warships of 12 different species. He had witnessed battles that destroyed entire planets. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was seeing now. The human ships were wrong. They moved without engines. They left no energy trails. They made no sound on any frequency. They simply existed in one place, and then they existed in another, as if the normal rules of physics did not apply to them. His communication panel lit up with an incoming transmission. Admiral Kevin Marshall appeared on screen. He was an older human male, gray hair cut short, eyes that looked tired but determined. He wore a simple uniform with no decorations except a single star on his collar. Valari Observation Fleet, Kevin said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. You have been watching us for 300 years. You have cataloged our population. You have calculated how many of us would make good slaves and how many would be processed for biological resources. We found your reports very educational. Torvak could not speak. His throat had closed with a fear he had never felt before. We are leaving now, Kevin continued. Do not follow us. Do not attempt to contact your homeworld. Your communication systems have already been disabled. You will drift here until we decide what to do with you. The transmission ended. Torvak watched as the human fleet moved. They spread across the solar system in moments, passing Mars and Jupiter and Saturn as if the distances meant nothing. And then, one by one, they vanished into the darkness between stars. He tried to follow. His ship was fast by galactic standards, one of the finest observation vessels ever built. He lost sight of the human fleet within seconds. For a long time, Torvak sat alone in the darkness. His crew was silent. His instruments showed nothing. Earth below was empty. A world of abandoned cities and silent highways. He wrote his final report by hand because his electronic systems were dead. They were never primitive, he wrote. They knew we were watching from the beginning. Every stumbling step, every failed rocket, every war and disaster was theater. They let us see what they wanted us to see. And while we watched and laughed at their struggles, they built something beyond our understanding. He paused, his hand trembling. They were waiting for us to make a move. We were always going to harvest them eventually. They knew this. and they prepared for it in ways we cannot comprehend. The report would never be sent. But Torvak finished it anyway, because someone needed to record what had happened. I do not know where they have gone. I do not know what they intend to do. But I know this. We made a terrible mistake. We looked at humanity and saw prey. We should have seen predators learning patience. On the bridge of the Endurance, Admiral Kevin Marshall watched the stars stream past. The ship moved through dimensions that the Volari did not know existed, crossing distances that should have taken years in mere hours. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos stood beside him. She was young, barely 30, but she had been training for this moment since she was born. Her parents had trained before her, and their parents before them. 300 years of preparation had led to this single day. All ships report ready, she said. The fleet is holding formation. Kevin nodded slowly. He felt the weight of 8 billion lives on his shoulders. Every human being was safe now, hidden in a place that no alien technology could find. But safety was not enough. It had never been enough. Begin Phase 2, he said quietly. Maria relayed the order. Across the fleet, crews who had waited their entire lives for this moment began to move. Sir, Maria said after a moment. The Council will respond. They have hundreds of thousands of warships. They control half the galaxy. Kevin turned to look at her. His eyes held no fear, only a deep and terrible sadness. They enslaved 37 billion sentient beings across 4 centuries, he said. They plan to add 8 billion more. They built an empire on suffering and called it civilization. He turned back to the viewport. It ends now, today. Not because we want revenge, but because we are the only ones who can stop it. We hid for 300 years, Maria. We let them believe we were weak because we were not ready to fight. But we are ready now. The fleet moved deeper into the galaxy. Behind them, Earth sat empty and silent, a monument to a species that had refused to be victims. In the observation station, Torvak finally finished his report. His last words were simple. Humans have risen. May whatever gods exist have mercy on us all. He did not know that mercy was exactly what the humans intended to offer, but mercy on their terms, and their terms would reshape the galaxy forever. 300 years before the fleet rose from Earth. A small spacecraft crashed in the Nevada desert. The official story said it was a weather balloon. The truth was far more terrifying. Dr. Samuel Price was the first human to see the alien bodies. He was a young scientist then, working at a classified research facility, and when the military brought him the wreckage, his hands would not stop shaking. The beings were not like anything from science fiction. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Their ship was small, designed for speed rather than combat, and their computer systems, once translated, revealed a truth that changed everything. They're scouts, Samuel told the gathered generals and politicians. His voice was steady, even though his heart was racing. Their species is called the Kethrani. They run the largest slave trade in the galaxy, and they've been watching us for decades. He pulled up the data on a screen. According to their records, Earth is already listed in their database. We're tagged for future harvest. They estimate our population will reach 10 billion within 2 centuries. That's when they plan to come for us. General William Carter, the oldest man in the room, spoke first. What are our options? Samuel took a deep breath. We have 2 choices. We can try to make contact, hope for diplomacy, pray that we can negotiate our way out of this. Or we can prepare. Prepare how? We have 200 years, maybe more. The Kethrani technology is advanced, but not impossible to understand. We can reverse engineer their systems. We can build ships of our own. We can develop weapons they've never seen. The room was silent for a long moment. And if we do all this, Carter said slowly, if we spend 2 centuries preparing for war, what happens to normal life? What happens to society? Samuel looked at him directly. Normal life continues. Society goes on as it always has. The preparation happens in secret, hidden from everyone except those who need to know. The aliens are watching us. If they see us building warships, they'll come early, and we won't be ready, so we hide. hide in plain sight. We show them exactly what they expect to see. A primitive species, struggling with petty conflicts, slowly developing technology that poses no threat. And underneath, in bunkers and facilities that their sensors cannot detect, we build something else entirely. The decision was made that night. It would remain the most closely guarded secret in human history. They called themselves the Keepers. The first generation numbered only a few thousand. Scientists, engineers, military officers, politicians who understood the stakes. They took an oath of silence that would bind their families for centuries. Dr. Samuel Price led the research division. Within 20 years, they had cracked the secrets of gravity manipulation. Within 50, they understood how to fold space itself. The Kethrani technology that had seemed impossibly advanced became the foundation for something far greater, but the Keepers faced a challenge that no amount of technology could solve. How do you prepare 8 billion people for evacuation without telling them why? The answer came from Dr. Catherine Ellis, a psychologist who had joined the program in its second generation. "We don't tell them anything," she said. "We build the infrastructure they'll need and call it something else. Emergency shelters become shopping centers. Evacuation routes become highways. And when the time comes, we move fast enough that no one has time to panic." The dimensional gates were the hardest part. They required power sources that could not exist on Earth without detection. So the Keepers built them somewhere else. Haven was not a planet. It was a constructed world built in a pocket dimension that existed outside normal space. It took 150 years to complete. When it was finished, it could house 10 billion people in comfort. With room to spare, the third generation of Keepers was born in Haven. They trained there, learned there, and prepared for a war they hoped would never come. But they knew it would. The Kethrani were patient, but they were also predictable. Sooner or later, they would decide that Earth was ready for harvest. Dr. Lisa Cole was born in 2089. She was the granddaughter of Catherine Ellis. Raised from birth to lead the Keepers when the time came. She spent her childhood learning the history that no textbook would ever record. She spent her teenage years training with weapons that no army had ever seen. And she spent her adult life waiting. The warning came in 2156. A Keeper agent embedded in the Velari observation network intercepted a transmission. The Kethrani Consortium, in partnership with the Velari Dominion and several other galactic powers, had approved the harvest of Earth. A fleet was being assembled. They would arrive within 5 years. Lisa gathered the Keeper Council in Haven's central chamber. The room was vast, designed to hold thousands, but today only 12 people sat at the table. They represented every branch of the preparation effort, every skill and specialty that humanity had developed in secret. "We have two options," Lisa said. "We can wait for them to come and defend Earth, or we can go to them." Admiral Kevin Marshall, commander of the human fleet, spoke quietly. "If we wait, we fight on their terms. They choose the battlefield. They control the timing. And even if we win, Earth becomes a war zone. And if we go to them, we take them by surprise. We dismantle their fleet before it ever launches. And we send a message that the galaxy will never forget." Lisa looked around the table. Every face showed the same determination. They had prepared for 300 years. Their ancestors had sacrificed everything for this moment. There was only one answer. "Begin the evacuation," she said. It took 6 hours. 8 billion people moved through dimensional gates to Haven. Most of them thought it was a drill. It's an emergency exercise that would end soon. By the time they realized the truth, Earth was already empty, and 50,000 ships were rising from the places where they had been hidden for centuries. On the bridge of the Endurance, Kevin Marshall watched his homeworld shrink in the viewport. He thought of his grandfather, who had helped design the first gravity drives. He thought of his father, who had commanded the first test flight. He thought of the billions of humans now safe in Haven, living lives that the slavers would never touch. "Set course for the Kethrani fleet," he ordered. "It's time to introduce ourselves." The Kethrani harvesting fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in the sector. 900 warships, each one capable of destroying a small moon, gathered at the staging point near the Nexus cluster. They had made this journey dozens of times before. The harvest of a primitive world was routine work. Fleet Commander Vasek stood on the bridge of his flagship, reviewing the mission parameters. Earth would be simple. The humans had no real defenses, no ships worth mentioning, no weapons that could scratch his hull. His soldiers would land, round up the population, and sort them into categories. The young and healthy would become slaves. The rest would be processed for biological materials. Nothing would be wasted. He was dictating notes for his post-mission report when his sensor officer made a sound that Vasek had never heard before. It was something between a scream and a whimper. "Commander," the officer whispered. "Ships. Thousands of ships. They came from nowhere." Vasek looked at the tactical display and felt his blood turn cold. The human fleet surrounded them completely. 50,000 vessels had appeared in the space of a heartbeat, forming a sphere that enclosed the entire Kathrani force. They hung in the darkness like stars, silent and still, waiting. A communication request appeared on his screen. Vasek accepted it with trembling hands. Admiral Kevin Marshall looked at him from the display. The human's face was calm, almost peaceful. "Fleet Commander Vasek," Kevin said. "You are here to harvest Earth, to enslave 8 billion people. To sell our children in your markets and process our elderly for their biological components." Vasek tried to speak, but no words came out. "I am giving you one chance," Kevin continued. "Surrender your fleet. Power down your weapons. Allow your crews to be taken into custody. If you do this, no one will be harmed." The words finally came. "You dare threaten the Kathrani Consortium? We control 30 systems. We have allies across the galaxy. If you attack us, you will face the combined might of—" "I am not threatening you," Kevin said quietly. "I am offering you mercy. This is the only time I will offer it. You have 60 seconds to decide." Vasek felt rage replace his fear. These primitives, these cattle, dared to speak to him this way. He had commanded harvesting fleets for 40 years. He had broken worlds that had tried to resist. He would not surrender to prey. "All ships," he commanded. "Open fire." 900 Kathroni warships unleashed their weapons at once. Plasma cannons, fusion missiles, particle beams. Enough firepower to crack a planet in half? The barrage lasted for 30 seconds. When the light faded, the human fleet was completely unharmed. Kevin Marshall had not moved during the attack. He had not flinched. He had simply waited. "That was your answer," he said. "Here is ours." The human ships did not fire weapons. They did not launch missiles. They simply moved. Maria Santos, watching from the Endurance, would later describe it as surgery rather than battle. The human vessels passed through the Kathrani fleet like ghosts, and wherever they passed, systems failed. Weapons went dark. Engines died. Life support flickered, but remained active. The Kathrani ships were not destroyed. They were disabled, rendered helpless without a single casualty. It took 17 minutes when it was over. 900 Kathrani warships drifted dead in space, their crews alive but powerless. Fleet Commander Vasek sat alone on his darkened bridge, staring at displays that showed nothing. Kevin Marshall appeared on his screen one last time. "Your crews will be returned to your homeworld," he said. "Your ships will be dismantled. Your cargo holds, which you've prepared to fill with human slaves, will remain empty forever." He paused. "Tell your consortium what happened here. Tell your allies. Tell the Galactic Council. The harvest of Earth has been canceled, and we are coming to cancel every other harvest as well." The news reached the Galactic Council before Vasek reached home. High Counselor Dravik convened an emergency session on Valeris. Prime, 12 species, each representing vast empires, gathered in chambers that had not seen such urgency in 10,000 years. "This is impossible," said Ambassador Yorin of the Thessary Collective. "The Kathrani fleet was invincible. How could primitives defeat them?" "They are not primitives," Dravik said heavily. "They never were. We were fooled. For 300 years, we watched them and saw what they wanted us to see. Then what do we do? If they can defeat the Kathrani, they can defeat any of us. We show them the full power of the Council. We assemble every warship from every member species. We demonstrate that the galaxy will not be threatened by a single upstart world. The vote was unanimous. Within days, a fleet of 200,000 vessels began gathering at the Valaris staging point. It was the largest military force in galactic history. On the Endurance, Kevin Marshall received the intelligence report with a sigh. "They're bringing everything they have," Maria said. 200,000 ships? Maybe more. They think they can overwhelm us with numbers. Kevin shook his head slowly. They don't understand. This isn't about ships. It isn't about weapons. It's about what we're willing to fight for. He stood and walked to the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before him, each one representing systems where slaves were bought and sold, where beings were treated as property, where suffering was just another commodity. "How many slaves are currently held in Council space?" he asked. Maria checked her data. "Approximately 37 billion across all member worlds." 37 billion. Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. 37 billion people who have no hope, who wake up every day knowing that their lives are not their own, who have never known freedom. He turned back to face her. The Council thinks this is a war about territory, about power, about who controls what. They don't understand that we're not fighting for any of those things. What are we fighting for? For them? For all of them. For every being in chains, every child born into slavery, every person who has been told that their life has no value. He returned to his command chair. "Open a channel to the Council fleet. Let them know we're coming, and let them know that we're bringing something they've never faced before." "What's that?" Kevin's eyes were hard as stone. Judgment. The Council fleet waited in formation near the Valaris system. 200,000 warships gathered from 12 different species, armed with weapons that had conquered half the galaxy. Their commanders were confident. They had numbers. They had experience. They had technology tested in 1,000 battles. The human fleet arrived without warning. Admiral Kevin Marshall appeared on the command channel, his image broadcast to every Council ship simultaneously. He looked tired, as if the weight of what was coming already pressed upon his shoulders. "This is your final opportunity," he said. "Stand down your weapons. Release your slave populations. Submit to a tribunal of your victims. If you do these things, this ends peacefully." High Counselor Dravik laughed. The sound echoed across the communication network. "We're 50,000 against 200,000, he said. "You may have surprised the Kethrani, but you cannot surprise us. We are ready for you. We have planned for every possibility." Kevin nodded slowly. "Then you leave me no choice." The battle began. Or rather, what the Council called a battle began. Their ships opened fire with everything they had. Missiles streaked across space. Energy beams cut through the darkness. The combined firepower of 200,000 vessels converged on the human fleet. It passed through them like light through glass. The human ships existed in spaces, in dimensions that the Council had never discovered. Their weapons could not touch what they could not reach. And then the humans moved. Captain? Daniel Harris commanded the Resolute, one of 500 vessels assigned to the Council flagship. He was 38 years old, born in Haven, trained since childhood for exactly this moment. His orders were simple. Disable. Do not destroy. Target their weapon systems, he ordered. Leave life support intact. We want prisoners, not casualties. Lieutenant Amy Porter worked her console with practiced ease. The Resolute passed through the enemy formation like a knife through water, its disabling fields shutting down system after system. Within minutes, a dozen Council warships drifted powerless. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield. The human fleet did not fight the way the Council expected. They did not trade shots. They did not hold positions. They simply appeared where they wanted to be and removed the enemy's ability to resist. High Counselor. Dravik watched his tactical display with growing horror. His ships were falling silent one by one, their weapons dead, their engines cold. His mighty fleet, the greatest military force in galactic history, was being taken apart like a child's toy. "All ships retreat," he ordered desperately. "Fall back to the secondary position." But there was no retreat. The human ships were everywhere, moving faster than thought, appearing behind vessels that tried to run. Within 3 hours, 200,000 Council warships floated dead in space. Not one had been destroyed. Not one crew member had been killed. Kevin Marshall appeared on Dravik's screen. "Your fleet is disabled," Kevin said. "Your crews will be returned to their homeworlds. Your military infrastructure will be dismantled. And now, the liberation begins." The human fleet split into 1,000 smaller forces, each assigned to a different region of Council space. They moved faster than any conventional ship, crossing sectors in hours instead of weeks. And wherever they went, chains broke. Captain Daniel Harris brought the Resolute to Thesser 4, home to the largest slave compound in the Thessari Collective. 200,000 beings were held there, sorted by species and skill, waiting to be sold. The compound was defended by ground forces and orbital platforms. Daniel destroyed neither. Instead, his ships deployed teams of human soldiers who moved through the facility like shadows. They disabled the neural inhibitors that kept the slaves docile. They neutralized the guards without killing them. They opened every cage and every cell. A young Thessari female found Daniel as he oversaw the evacuation. She was barely an adult, her scales still soft, her eyes wide with confusion. "I don't understand," she said. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. She had never known anything except captivity. Freedom was a concept she could not grasp. "We're humans," he said, "and we're doing this because no one did it for us. But what do you want? What do we owe you?" "Nothing. You owe us nothing. You never will." Medical ships arrived to process the freed slaves. Many of them were sick, malnourished, damaged by years of abuse. Human doctors worked alongside volunteers from other species, treating injuries that had been ignored for decades. Dr. Patricia Reyes had served in Haven's Medical Corps for 15 years. She had prepared for this mission her entire adult life, studying alien biology, learning how to heal wounds she had never seen. Nothing had prepared her for the reality. A small child, species unknown, clung to her leg as she worked. He had no family. No name that he knew. No memory of anything except the compound where he had been born. "You're safe now," Patricia told him gently. "No one will ever hurt you again." The child did not understand her words, but something in her voice reached him. For the first time in his short life, he slept without fear. Across the galaxy, 37 billion slaves walked free. The logistics were staggering. Human ships carried food, medicine, and shelter materials to worlds that had never known anything except exploitation. Freed slaves who had skills became teachers, helping others adjust to lives they had never imagined. Those who had been broken found therapists trained to help them heal. Kevin Marshall toured the liberation zones personally. He visited compounds where slaves had lived in darkness for generations. He spoke with beings who had forgotten their own names. He listened to stories that would have broken a lesser man. Why? Asked an elderly Kathrani male who had been enslaved by his own species. Why do humans care what happens to us? Kevin sat beside him in the refugee camp. 300 years ago, he said, a slave ship found our world. They planned to do to us what they had done to you. We could have become victims. Instead, we became something else.
What?
Protectors. Not because we wanted power or glory or revenge, but because someone had to stand up. Someone had to say that this ends. And if not us, then who? The old Kathrani looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering. You could have stayed hidden. You could have protected only your own people. Why risk everything for strangers? Kevin smiled sadly. Because we were all strangers once. Because someone, somewhere, should have helped us when the slavers first came. No one did. So we decided that, when we had the power to help others, we would never make that same choice. He stood. Rest now. You're free. Whatever comes next, no one will ever own you again. The old Kathrani watched him go. and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wept. Not from sorrow. From hope. 1 year had passed since the human fleet rose from Earth. The galaxy was changed beyond recognition. The Galactic Council no longer existed. Its chambers on Valeris Prime stood empty, monuments to an age of cruelty that had finally ended. In its place, a new assembly was forming. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in a structure that humans had helped design. There were no elevated platforms here, no thrones for powerful species to look down upon the weak. Every delegate sat at the same level, at tables arranged in a great circle. Dr. Lisa Cole stood at the center of the circle. She was 67, the years old now, gray at the temples like her friend Kevin Marshall. Worn by a year of work that had tested every limit of human endurance, but her eyes were bright with hope. "We gathered today," she said, "not as conquerors and conquered, not as masters and slaves. We gather as equals, to build something that has never existed in this galaxy before." The delegates listened in silence. Many of them had been slaves a year ago. Some had been slavers. All of them understood that this moment would shape the future of 100 worlds. "The old ways are dead," Lisa continued. "The slave markets are closed. The processing facilities are destroyed. Every being in this galaxy is now free to live according to their own choices, their own dreams, their own hopes." She paused. But freedom is not enough. Freedom without justice is incomplete. And so today, we begin the process of accountability. The trials had been difficult to organize. How do you judge crimes committed across centuries, by entire civilizations against billions of victims? Human legal experts had worked with scholars from a dozen species to create a framework that balanced justice with mercy. Former High Counselor Dravik was the first to face judgment. He stood before the tribunal in a simple room, stripped of all the symbols of power he had once worn. The judges were a mixed panel: former slaves, former counselors, neutral observers, and humans who had studied the evidence carefully. The charges were read aloud: complicity in the enslavement of 37 billion sentient beings, authorization of harvest operations against 17 species, personal profit from the sale of living beings. Dravik did not deny anything. The evidence was overwhelming. But when given the chance to speak, he said something that surprised everyone. "I believed we were right," he said. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I believed that some species were meant to serve, and others were meant to rule. I believed that the strong had a natural right to use the weak. These beliefs were taught to me by my parents, who learned them from their parents, going back generations beyond count." He looked around the room at the faces watching him. "I do not say this to excuse myself. There is no excuse. But I say it because I want you to understand that I was not a monster in my own eyes. I was simply a man who never questioned what he was told. And that, perhaps, is the greatest crime of all." The tribunal sentenced him to serve the remainder of his life, helping to rebuild what he had destroyed. Not in prison, but in the refugee camps, the medical facilities, the reconstruction zones. He would see every day the consequences of what he had done. He would spend whatever years remained trying to make amends that could never truly be made. Other trials followed. Some defendants showed remorse. Some remained defiant. All received judgment based on their individual actions, their individual choices, their individual responsibility. Admiral Kevin Marshall watched the proceedings from a distance. He had refused any official position in the new assembly. He had refused medals, honors, monuments in his name. When the liberation was complete, he had simply returned to Haven and asked to be left alone. Maria. Santos found him in a small garden he had planted near his quarters. He was growing vegetables, of all things. Tomatoes and peppers and beans, the same crops his grandfather had grown on Earth before everything changed. "The assembly wants you to address them," she said. "They want to hear from the man who led the fleet." Kevin did not look up from his work. "I'm not that man anymore," he said. "I was a soldier because we needed soldiers. Now we need farmers and teachers and builders. Let someone else stand in front of crowds. They need to see you. They need to know that we're not going to become what we fought against. Kevin was silent for a long moment. Do you know what I think about, Maria? Every night when I try to sleep? What? The faces of the Kathrani sailors whose ships we disabled. The look in their eyes when they realized they were helpless. We didn't kill them. We were careful about that. But we broke something in them. We showed them that everything they believed about power and strength was wrong. He finally looked at her. That was necessary. I believe that completely. But it still cost something. Not from them. From me, Maria sat down beside him in the dirt. Is that why you're growing vegetables? Kevin smiled faintly. My grandfather used to say that the best way to heal from war is to grow something. To put your hands in the earth and make life instead of taking it. He held up a small tomato, bright red in the haven sunlight. I spent 50 years preparing for battle. Now I'm going to spend whatever time I have left preparing for peace. Maria looked at him for a long moment. The assembly still needs you, even if you don't stand at the front. Even if you just sit in the back and say nothing. They need to know that the humans who freed them aren't going to abandon them. Kevin sighed. But I'm not giving any speeches. The new Galactic Assembly met for its first formal session 1 week later. Representatives from 312 species filled the circular chamber. Some had traveled from the far edges of explored space. Some had never left their homeworlds before. All of them came with hope and fear and uncertainty about what the future would hold. Dr. Lisa Cole spoke the opening words. We begin today not with declarations of principle or statements of law. We begin with a simple question. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in? She looked around the chamber. The humans who freed you did not do so to become your new masters. We did not break the chains of slavery so that we could forge new chains of our own. We did it because we believed that every being, regardless of species or origin or history, deserves the chance to live free. A young delegate from a species that had been enslaved for 8 centuries raised her hand. How do we know you won't change? How do we know that in 100 years or 1,000, humans won't become exactly what the council was? Lisa nodded. It was a fair question. An important question. You don't know, she admitted. No one can promise what the future will hold. But I can tell you what we have built into the foundation of this assembly. No species has a permanent seat. No species has veto power. Every decision requires the consent of the majority, and any decision can be reversed by future generations. She smiled. We designed this system to protect against ourselves. Because we know that power corrupts. We know that good intentions can become terrible actions. And we would rather build weakness into our own position than risk becoming the very thing we destroyed. In the back of the chamber, Kevin Marshall listened. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was enough. The session lasted for 12 hours. By the end, the first laws of the new assembly had been passed. Slavery was forbidden in all forms. The trafficking of sentient beings was punishable by exile from all member worlds. And every species was guaranteed the right to representation, regardless of size or power. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was a beginning. That night, Kevin returned to his garden. The stars above Haven were different from the stars above Earth, but they were still stars. They still burned with light that had traveled millions of years to reach his eyes. He thought about the future, about the challenges that would come, about the mistakes that would be made, about the endless work of building something better than what had existed before. And for the first time in 50 years, he allowed himself to hope. The humans had vanished overnight. They had risen with 50,000 vessels. They had freed a galaxy from chains, and now perhaps they could rest. But Kevin knew better. The work was never finished. The struggle for freedom never ended. There would always be new challenges, new threats, new choices to make. He picked a ripe tomato from his garden and ate it slowly, tasting the sweetness of something he had grown with his own hands. Tomorrow, the work would continue. Tonight, he would simply be grateful for how far they had come.